Tokens. Now, because this is the way that most DAOs are going to function as a group or as a team, from a security engineer viewpoint, again, from anyone viewpoint, you really kind of want to watch what's going on and with your governance tokens. Right? These are something you're going to want to monitor because this is going to be the next biggest thing you create after you create your rule set. Right, you're going to have a governance token so that people can vote on the proposals. And essentially, this is how you're going to intercommunicate within the system. This is how you vote on proposals, whether they're technical or procedural or what to buy. These are how you're going to decentralize all of your decision making and give holders a say on the project's direction, or the company's direction, or whatever it is you're going to do. So that's going to be a big part of what you do in the security realm on this project, watching these bad boys. So how these work, right? These are basically an ERC20 token. Now, the point that they're ERC20 means that you can actually buy and sell these things, right? Now, these are how you can stake a company. These are how you can use it as collateral. So they start to build a value as you go through the process. Platform users are going to get their governance tokens in exchange for either using the protocol, some other process, a reward, or something else. But eventually they're going to end up being traded. So that is something that you do want to watch for, is that as they're distributed, you can actually use those governance tokens to attract liquidity, to attract users. And then some tokens have become speculations, right? In other words, speculators have come in and said, oh, hey, we have this process. Let's use this governance token as a form of value. And they actually really do represent a value, because if you have a liquidity pool of, like, say, $1 million, the governance token on how to vote for that liquidity pool, along with the token used to fund that pool, becomes really an interesting relationship between governance and protocol token. So it's really kind of interesting in how they put these things together, because these things can be used all over the place, right? Consider these like shares in a company. We're all used to, we're going to go buy 100 shares of Ford, 100 shares of Google, 100 shares of Microsoft, and 100 shares of some other company, right? Shareholders have rights and responsibilities, but you can buy and sell those shares and they become speculation tools. They become the stock market. There is absolutely no reason why you can't have a DeFi platform that does nothing but trade governance tokens. If you go out to some place like crypto.com, you can find governance tokens actually listed with their specific value. So you could actually buy in to specific governance token purchases and then become a token holder for that platform. Right? From a security viewpoint, I think really for me, the problem would be a data leakage. Say a decision is being made off chain. If you know about it early, you can go and you can speculate on that, or influence peddling, right? From private data in the discussion system or something else. If you tip a series of investors that, hey, this protocol is going to go spend X amount of dollars on this thing, you can get other people in there, maybe actually undercut or make the DAO overspend on a product or service, an NFT, or whatever it is they're going to buy. So you really do kind of want to watch for this stuff. Some of it's kind of legal, some of it's not really information security thing, but it's something that your information security engineers and your engineers are going to be working in hands with your legal department or a legal group, right? Now, these tokens are used to vote on proposals, like where the money goes, improvement proposals, and governance proposals. So you've got a lot of use that's going on with these governance tokens, right? They're not just a thing. They're actually really the way the companies run, and they really do equate to shareholders of a public company, right? Now, what's interesting, though, is that in all the stuff I've read, and all the scholarly stuff especially, is that participation just becomes this issue. You may not have enough people to actually pass a proposal. So governance tokens may just become sometimes something that people just go to speculate on. They're not really interested in your DAO. They're interested in the value the DAO has, right? They're interested in that liquidity pool. They're interested in the value of the NFTs you have. So if I have that, if the whole company goes out, they do a liquidation event, they pull and pay all of their governance token holders money, there's a reason to hold the governance token, right? But they're not going to be full participants in what you're doing. They may not have an opinion. They may not understand their proposal. It may be technological and they may not get it. It may be procedural and who freaking cares kind of thing, right? So you could always have a problem with participation. So there should be a way to use non-voting member tokens, right? So companies, shareholders, big companies all have proxy voting systems, right? You can assign or lend your governance tokens to someone to vote, the proxy system. There's also actually an idea of not saying no means yes, right? So not voting means the proposal is approved by the non-voting members without an actual abstain or an actual vote. So you could have a pool of no's, but then we'll count them as yeses because they didn't bother to participate in it. So there's lots of ways of trying to make it so that you don't have a really valuable proposal die in committee because you can't get enough votes to do this. Now, I'm a big fan of the proxy system, but I've seen some companies actually go ahead and use if you don't say yes, or if you don't say no explicitly, if you don't vote, your vote will be counted as a yes, that we want to do whatever it is we want to do, especially in an emergency situation, right? Like you've been hacked, you have to change something, the SEC is breathing down your neck because something happened. Those are things that you really can't wait for your non-voting members to get a grip, right? So voting can be misused, right? So again, since we've all had problems with voting, right? So generally we think of one token, one vote, but people were going to develop voting blocks. You need to understand that people are just going to go ahead that, hey, I like this block, I want to drive the company in this direction, even though that's not how it was originally informed or intended. Or they may just see a big pile of money and want to pull that out. And they don't have any responsibility to the DAO. They don't care. They just bought some governance tokens and they want to have a liquidation event and get that money out, right? Some members are there simply for the idea that, ooh, I have a governance token. This is so cool. And they don't want responsibility for the system. They don't really want to run it. They just want to have I have a governance token. And it's super cool that I have one. The big thing is to make sure that you're monitoring the vote and making sure it's fair, because you do have a bunch of different kinds of personalities inside that voting system. They may not vote in their own best interest, and they may not vote in the best interest of the DAO. They may not vote, right? So there's going to be attempts to manipulate the vote. There absolutely 100% of the time going to be some kind of attempt to manipulate the vote, either through blocks, consortia, off-chain collusion to vote in a particular way on this issue. If you vote this way on my issue, right? These are all going to happen. Even if it's an outside agency, if the governance module is not well protected, vote manipulation or loss of governance tokens is probably going to happen, right? Honestly. And again, there's not a whole lot of stuff that you can do here if it's off-chain and it's hidden and you don't have the ability to go through and actually forensically check the votes and blah, blah, blah. Over time, you'll see patterns develop on what is considered normal voting so that manipulation will stand out really, really, really quickly. If the vote looks funny, there's ways of going back, especially if you're off-chain voting, to go back and try to validate all this stuff. But again, it just all depends. It's just something you're going to look for, and it's going to be something you want to monitor for and have a way to recount those votes. Make sure the system is legit, because sometimes people will do crazy things because manipulation is an issue, right? Now, it's pretty standard in the industry when there's a new DAO seeking funding that they're going to do a party, right? They're going to launch a soft launch, a hard launch. Some of these bigger companies have gone through a soft launch and gotten a couple $1 million on the angel side, right? Angel funding side. And then they get to a mezzanine level where they get even more money. And then finally they get to the VC side on that whole process. So funding is going to happen. And what they might do is give out governance tokens to cover angel, mezzanine, and then regular VC funding, depending on what you've got going on, right? Now, at some point, especially at that angel point, those governance tokens are going to have their lowest physical cost. Now, some speculators are going to try to take advantage of that and say, hey, I'll angel fund you for 20% of the company. If you've ever watched Shark Tank, that's an angel fund in process. That is exactly going through and trying to do an angel fund. Mezzanine is going to work somewhat the same way. VC is going to work in a very similar but very different way because the standards are different along the way. Angels are really more used to some really highly speculative kind of ideas and other things, but they're going to want a large chunk of the company for it, right? They think they're risking their money, so I want a larger portion of the company. Don't be surprised if they want 20, 30, 40% of the company. So if you get 40% of the governance token, you pretty much so have a big block to vote. The only way it's going to be diluted is if you give out more governance tokens, right? But there's a way to get that advantage going, because if you can get advantage to get those tokens, you can have a bigger block to vote in, right? Whether it's angel mezzanine, whether that's an investor group, whether it's mom and dad giving you money, or whether that's going and you standing on Patreon or something else to get money. There's a process in here that you may pre-sell tokens. So there's a process now that kind of started this idea of fair launch, right, in the DeFi world, to make sure that there are no private pre-sales of tokens, but everything is speculative when it comes to this, right? Now, set-asides for the founding team, even if they can't put up an investment, do they get governance tokens? Yes or no? Should they or should they not get governance tokens? It's often overlooked, but founders are also going to be financially stressed probably, right? So they may sell governance tokens to raise money, allowing a block to form that the founders can't respond to. So if you have an angel fund, you go and you give 40% of the company to angel fund, and then you are financially stressed, so you sell another block of 20 or 30%, you now have the possibility of a 70% block that's not going to respond to the founders or the actual DAOs process. So you can really manipulate that by how you give out tokens, whether it's at pre-sale to founders, and then they end up being financially stressed. You pre-sale stuff. It all depends on how you do this, but you just need to be really aware that you may manipulate the vote just by giving away too much stuff. Now, the other thing that's interesting too is something called yield farming. Now, remember I said if you got to crypto.com, you can actually pull up a bunch of different values for different kinds of governance tokens that you can actually buy on the open market. So the idea is that I am a DAO, I form a yield form, and basically what I'm going to do is kind of maximize DeFi platform incentive structures by giving money and then getting refund back. So I get my interest back. So essentially what you're doing is you're providing crypto assets to various DeFi protocols, different DAOs doing different things. So I may have a pool of 1 million Ethereum. I give out Ethereum to people. They get to use those and they give me money back, because essentially it's a loan. But it's more of a longer term loan. There's going to be some interest involved in this. I can get governance tokens for that loan, right? Or I can get something else for that loan. And then those are deposited. And then we just basically end up having a big mishmash of different kinds of tokens all over the place that I can load. I can earn interest on. I can access other types of digital assets to get to where I want to go. And what your goal here with yield farming is to take all those tokens, including the governance tokens, because it's really effective at bringing capital to a protocol. It's very effective. Right, but you end up with the holding company, the yield farmer ends up with just this big mishmash of tokens, but their risk is distributed across the entire ecosystem. So if one protocol goes bad and you're not over invested in that, then you're in pretty good shape. You can suffer that loss because you'll make that up in other kinds of digital assets or on interest or whatever else you're doing with the loan process that you've got. So yield farming is another way of really getting money into your DAO, but it can also be subject to manipulation, because now you have a whole yield farm. They're interested in what they make off interest. They're not interested in your DAO. They're not interested in what you do as long as you're making money. But they have a vote. So interesting, right? Different competing interests can do different things. Now, these really do have a value. Governance tokens have a value. It may only be like portions of a penny, but they can be exchanged for other tokens, even off blockchain. They are an ERC20 token, right? The more popular the protocol, the more likely the governance tokens are going to become even more valuable, right? Because they have a tangible value in what they represent. So you can have that governance token gives you the ability to have control over a liquidity pool, a slew of NFTs that are actually valuable, access to other forms of value, right? So you could actually go ahead and liquidate your governance tokens to get value from some other thing, just because there's a value to those. And the more popular, the more likelihood that those governance tokens are going to have a higher and higher value. It also all depends on people's mood and emotion, right? Say I really, really, really want to have an Ethereum governance token, not realizing that most Ethereum governance is done off blockchain. They don't, it's all off chain. Don't really have a token for that. But, you know, some clever, intrepid entrepreneur will probably come and say, hey, I don't mind pyramid scheming this, and come up with an Ethereum governance token. And everyone would take a look at that and go, oh my goodness, they just see the name and go straight to market. Could Ethereum move fast enough? I don't know. But it would be an interesting way of taking that idea of value to a big brand name and then causing a run on it. The interesting part about this, though, is that by the SEC, there's also the real possibility that your governance token be considered a security because it's equivalent to a shareholder certificate or going and buying 100 shares of Google or something else, right? So you're going to fall into a whole slew of federal laws and regulations. And if you are aware of them and you follow them, that can also drive value because that's a sign of quality, right? If you actually are following financial regulations, that gives people the ability to trust you and trust you enough that you, oh, hey, they're at least following some kind of financial regulation. They're not fly by night. Maybe, boom, I will give them my money because of X. I'll buy some of their governance tokens. I'm interested in this. So value comes in different ways, right? Brand name recognition, more popularity. If you have trust based on SEC regulation and financial laws, all of these things can help drive governance token value. Now, the other thing that's cropped up too is can you have more than one type of governance token? So you could have there's no reason why you can't, right? There's no logical reason why governance tokens cannot be typed. You could have one for technical problems. You could have one for investment issues. You could have one for overarching, making sure everything is harmonized. But then you run into complexity and you run into participation. And then how do you protect them from speculators, all right, or being misused? I heard the DAO. Like say you have a bunch of technical tokens, right? Technical governance tokens that all drive at how we're going to operate the contract, how we're going to make changes to the contract. Well, you piss off your lead developer who's got a lot of those kind of tokens. They sell those tokens on the open market. And now all of a sudden you have some third party in there with a big block of tokens that could be misused to hurt the DAO, to hold back innovation and change, to make sure contract changes don't happen. If in the event of a hacking event, all those things may happen. So again, when you have governance issues like this, it depends on what you want to do. It depends on how you want to engage your audience and your shareholders to do all this. But yes, you can have more than one token. All that does is really just increase your risk surface, right? Now, there are some really big advantages to having governance tokens. One, you probably are going to want this because it's an incentive to participate in the project, right? Everyone likes being paid. Everyone loves payday. But the process can be complex and abused, so you need to have your monitors in place. You need to have a firm set of rules about how you're going to deal with manipulation and other kinds of events. Government tokens have the advantage of just being decentralized, right? These are really how you're going to achieve decentralization within your DAO, right? If they're not there, you're not going to be able to have a say on how the project is run. So it's really kind of important that if you want to incentivize the participation in the project, you're going to have governance tokens. And these governance tokens are going to be bought, sold, traded, speculated, and everything else. The more valuable they become, the more valuable the platform becomes, and you're incentivizing users to use your platform by giving them governance tokens or having them buy governance tokens. And they think this is really a way of doing a virtual circle. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then, of course, if there's advantages, there's always going to be disadvantages too, right? So they can be complex. The more complex you make them, the harder they are to manage, the harder they are to do risk management on, the harder they are to understand how they can be used by some users, right? So some users may think they're really super technical, but they're really not. They want to buy a bunch of technical governance tokens for your DAO, and they don't know what they're doing. But they did it, right? So as a result of complexity, different kinds of token types, different functions, users may get bored. Users may go, oh, this is just too difficult. I don't care how this works anymore. I'm not going to bother voting, which means now you have to have a non-voting of the process, right? It's also possible for people to abuse their power, voting blocks to form, consortia to form. People will influence each other on how those governance tokens should be used. You know, Johnny and Joey are going to meet up over whiskey at a bar and talk about how they want to drive the DAO into the dirt because they got hurt or they hate what they've done or something else. So instead of just selling the governance tokens, they want to try to form a consortia block that will change the DAO or liquidate the DAO because maybe they have a lot of money and it's looking like a really tempting target, right? There's also a big lack of accountability. So if a decision turns out to be bad, it was a really bad idea to liquidate all these NFTs at this super low value when a week later they're worth $100 million more, there's no one to point to. You have a group of people that voted in a certain way. You just don't know what the motivations behind that vote were, and you don't know if it was subject to manipulation. You don't know if it was subject to someone coming in behind the scenes and doing some politicking, and it hurt the DAO. So you don't know. So risk and reward, right? It just all depends on where someone is. The thing is that as a security engineer or as an owner or whatever, you should be able to track patterns, right? You should be able to understand what's normal inside of the DAO and how it operates and be able to track patterns. If something weird's starting to look like, go back and start investigating it, especially if it looks like something is looking egregious, something like a consortia is forming that will hurt the DAO. Now, assuming you are a big business, right? Assuming you're not Tornado Cash or someone else as a DAO, you're going to have a governance token of some sort, right? They're essential to running the DAO, being a truly decentralized app or a gambling pool, right? Governance tokens can be a security, right? If implemented, they're going to drive value. They're going to be worth something, right? Because governance tokens have value that can be traded, speculated on, hoarded, manipulated, otherwise put at risk. And again, it's just another ERC20 token. So there's a possibility of off-chain sales of these tokens to actors that do not have the best interests of the DAO at heart, right? And then participation is always going to be a problem. So it's going to be tempting to manipulate the vote to get the desired outcome. It's going to be really tempting to do that. But proxies, having proxy statements, if someone's not going to vote, just to proxy them over to somebody else inside the governance chain, or having a non-voting process kind of probably help you get a little bit higher level of participation. The danger here of not having enough participation is that critical changes can't get passed because there's just simply not enough people that will vote on that to say yes. Okay, that's it for this section on governance tokens and DAOs. I will see you in the next lecture.